Subscribe to Storylab for more stories. Now let's begin this one. Chapter 1. The Last Supper. Colin Morales adjusted his tie nervously as he sat at the mahogany dining table in the Garrison family mansion. The chandelier cast dancing shadows across the pristine white tablecloth, while the aroma of prime rib filled the air. Across from him sat his wife of 5 years, Stephanie Morales, her blonde hair perfectly styled and her emerald dress hugging her curves. She'd been distant lately, always on her phone, always busy with her fitness classes. Harvey Garrison, his father-in-law, cut into his steak with surgical precision. The man commanded respect in Millbrook, owner of the largest construction company in 3 counties, member of the country club board, and a political kingmaker who'd built half the town's infrastructure. His weathered face bore the confidence of a man who'd never known failure. "So, Colin," Harvey began, his voice carrying that familiar condescending tone, "how's that little tech venture of yours coming along? Still working out of Bobby Shannon's garage?" Colin's jaw tightened. His cybersecurity startup, Night Shield Technologies, had been his passion project for 2 years. He'd mortgaged their house, drained their savings, and worked 18-hour days developing revolutionary encryption software. But to the Garrisons, it was just a hobby, a distraction from what they considered real work. "We're making progress," Colin replied carefully. "The prototype testing is going well. I have meetings with potential investors next month." Stephanie let out a sharp laugh that cut through the air like glass. "Investors?" "Colin, honey, you've been saying that for months. Face it, your startup is a joke." The words hit Colin like a physical blow. This was his wife, the woman who'd promised to support his dreams, who'd whispered encouragement during their late-night conversations when they were dating. Now she spoke about his life's work like it was a child's fantasy. Harvey's eyes gleamed with amusement. He leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine. "Well, Colin, when reality hits and this whole thing collapses, you know you're always welcome at Garrison Construction. I could use another project manager. Good steady work, steady paycheck. None of this pipe dream nonsense." The older man's tone was fatherly, but Colin caught the underlying message. "You're a failure, boy. Come work for a real man when you're ready to grow up." Colin forced a smile. "That's very generous, Harvey. If your startup fails, will you come work for me?" Harvey pressed, clearly enjoying himself. The question hung in the air like a dare. Stephanie giggled, the sound sharp and cruel. "His startup is a joke, Dad." But Colin's too stubborn to admit it. Colin looked around the table. Harvey's smug satisfaction. Stephanie's mocking smile. Even the portraits on the walls seemed to judge him. Generations of successful Garrisons looking down at the dreamer who'd married into their family. "Duly noted," Colin said quietly, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. The conversation moved on to local politics and Harvey's latest business acquisitions, but Colin barely heard it. He studied his wife's face, noting how she avoided eye contact, how her fingers nervously played with her wedding ring. There were other signs too. New perfume, unexplained absences, the way she whispered into her phone when she thought he wasn't listening. As dinner ended, Colin excused himself early, claiming he had work to catch up on. Neither Stephanie nor Harvey seemed disappointed by his departure. Driving home, through Millbrook's quiet streets, Colin's mind raced. The town looked different somehow, smaller, more suffocating. Every building, every street corner represented Harvey Garrison's influence. The man who'd just humiliated him owned this place, controlled it, shaped it according to his will. But Colin Morales wasn't the weak man they thought he was. Growing up in Detroit's roughest neighborhoods had taught him that survival meant being smarter, harder, and more ruthless than anyone expected. He'd clawed his way through MIT on scholarships and determination, graduated summa cum laude, and built his first successful security firm before selling it to fund Night Shield. The Garrisons saw a dreamer playing with computers. They had no idea they were looking at a predator. That night, Colin sat in his home office, staring at his computer screen. The Night Shield prototype wasn't just working, it was revolutionary. His encryption algorithms could protect government databases, corporate secrets, and military communications. Several Silicon Valley giants had already expressed serious interest, though he'd kept those conversations private. He pulled up his hidden files, documents, and code that Stephanie knew nothing about. His real work. His real potential. By morning, Colin Morales had made a decision that would change everything. Chapter 2. The Vanishing. Colin's phone buzzed with its third call from Stephanie as he stood in the parking lot of the First National Bank. He let it go to voicemail, just like the previous two. Inside his jacket pocket, certified cashier's checks totaling $847,000 represented everything he owned. The sale of his first company's remaining assets, cashed investments, and the advance payment from a defense contractor who'd seen his encryption demo. 3 hours earlier, he'd quietly transferred the house deed into Stephanie's name. Let her have it. Let her have the life Harvey Garrison had built for his precious daughter. Colin wanted no part of it anymore. His reflection in the bank's glass doors showed a man transformed. Gone was the nervous husband from last night's dinner. In his place stood someone harder, more focused. Someone ready to disappear. At the bus station, Colin bought a ticket to Chicago under his mother's maiden name. From there, he'd take another bus to Seattle, then fly to Singapore using an ID he'd acquired through channels most people didn't know existed. His MIT education had introduced him to more than just coding. It had connected him with brilliant minds who operated in the gray areas between legal and necessary. The first voicemail from Stephanie was concerned. Colin, where are you? You weren't in bed this morning and your car's gone. The second was irritated. This isn't funny anymore. Call me back. The third was panicked. Colin, please, I'm worried. Dad's asking questions. Where are you? He deleted them all without listening to the end. Singapore became Colin's launching pad. Using his real name and credentials, he partnered with Damon Casey, a venture capitalist he'd met at a tech conference 2 years earlier. Casey had been impressed by Colin's work then, but frustrated by his small-town thinking. Now, freed from Millbrook's limitations, Colin presented his full vision. Nightshield Technologies went global within 6 months. Colin's encryption software didn't just protect data. It revolutionized how governments and corporations thought about cybersecurity. His algorithms could predict and prevent attacks before they happened, learning and adapting in real time. The Pentagon bought the first major license for $50 million. Banking giants in London and Tokyo followed. Soon, tech companies were offering Colin partnerships worth hundreds of millions. But Colin's real genius wasn't just in the code. It was in understanding people. He studied his clients, learned their weaknesses, their fears, their secrets. Information was power, and power was what Colin craved. While building his tech empire, Colin also invested in other ventures. Real estate developments in emerging markets. Biotech startups with breakthrough potential. Cryptocurrency platforms that existed in legal gray areas but generated massive returns. Everything Colin touched turned to gold, but not through luck. He was methodical, ruthless, and absolutely unforgiving to anyone who underestimated him. Business partners who tried to cheat him found their companies destroyed by mysterious security breaches. Competitors who stole his ideas discovered their own secrets leaked to the press. Colin Morales was becoming exactly what Harvey Garrison had mocked, a successful entrepreneur. But he was also becoming something the old man could never comprehend. A force of nature who remembered every slight, every insult, every moment of humiliation. Through it all, Colin monitored Millbrook from afar. He knew when Harvey won the contract to build the new city hall. He knew when Stephanie started volunteering at the animal shelter. He knew about her twice-weekly yoga classes that weren't at any yoga studio in town. Most importantly, he knew about Trevor Camacho. Trevor was Harvey's newest project manager, a smooth-talking charmer who'd transferred from the company's Denver office 8 months ago. Tall, athletic, with the kind of easy confidence that attracted attention wherever he went. Colin's surveillance had captured Trevor entering and leaving Stephanie's yoga classes that turned out to be private sessions in a rented apartment across town. The betrayal stung, but not in the way it might have hurt the old Colin. This Colin felt something colder, satisfaction. They'd given him the perfect weapon to destroy them. As his first year of exile neared its end, Colin's net worth crossed the billion-dollar threshold. Nightshield Technologies had become the dominant force in cybersecurity, with Colin holding controlling interest in 6 other companies and investment portfolios spanning 3 continents. But money was just the beginning. Colin had spent the year building something more valuable than wealth, a network. He now had contacts in intelligence agencies, multinational corporations, criminal organizations, and media empires. People who owed him favors. People who feared him. People who understood that Colin Morales was not a man to be crossed. Sitting in his penthouse office overlooking Singapore's skyline, Colin made another decision. It was time to go home. Time to remind Millbrook and the garrisons what happened to people who underestimated Colin Morales. Chapter 3. The Return. The black Mercedes S-Class pulled into Millbrook just as the morning sun crested the hills surrounding the small town. Colin sat in the passenger seat, his custom-tailored suit pristine despite the 2-hour drive from the airport. In the seat behind him, Francis Drew, his head of security, reviewed files on a tablet. Francis was a former Navy SEAL who transitioned into private security after a distinguished military career. Colin had recruited him 6 months ago, not just for his tactical skills, but for his absolute loyalty and discretion. Francis understood that working for Colin Morales meant operating in spaces where conventional morality didn't apply. The target properties are confirmed, Francis reported in his gravelly voice. Garrison Construction Headquarters, the family mansion, and Trevor Camacho's apartment complex. We've installed surveillance in all locations. Audio and visual feeds are active. Colin nodded, his eyes scanning the familiar streets. Millbrook looked exactly the same. The same small businesses, the same tree-lined neighborhoods, the same air of provincial contentment. But Colin saw it differently now. He saw Harvey Garrison's fingerprints everywhere, from the municipal buildings to the shopping centers. This was a man's kingdom, built on decades of influence and connection. Soon it will be a tomb. Any changes in their routines? Colin asked. Stephanie Morales has maintained her pattern. Yoga classes Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, usually lasting 3 hours. Trevor Camacho arrives at the apartment 15 minutes before her, leaves an hour after she does. And Harvey, board meeting at the country club every Friday morning, followed by lunch with Mayor Jim McCoy and Police Chief Alan McLaughlin. He's predictable. Colin's phone buzzed with a message from his assistant in Singapore. Another acquisition had been finalized, a media company with holdings in small-town newspapers across the Midwest, including the Millbrook Gazette. The car stopped outside the Grand Millbrook Hotel, the town's premier accommodation. It was also owned by Harvey Garrison, though he kept that ownership buried under layers of shell companies. Colin's research had uncovered the connection, along with dozens of other hidden business interests. Mr. Morales, the hotel manager, approached nervously as Colin stepped from the car. Word of his arrival had preceded him. A billionaire tech mogul booking the penthouse suite was the kind of news that spread quickly in a small town. Welcome to the Grand Millbrook. We've prepared everything according to your specifications. Colin nodded curtly. His specifications had been extensive, complete privacy, dedicated internet lines, and most importantly, no communication with local media about his presence. For now, he wanted to observe before revealing himself. The penthouse suite offered a panoramic view of Millbrook, including the Garrison Construction Building and the country club where Harvey held court. Colin stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, studying the town below like a general surveying a battlefield. His phone rang. Damon Casey's name appeared on the screen. Colin, the morning numbers look incredible. Casey's excited voice filled the room. Night Shield just signed 3 new Fortune 500 contracts. We're projecting 40% growth this quarter. Good, Colin replied, his tone flat. Transfer $50 million to the discretionary fund. I may need liquid assets for some investments. There was a pause. Casey had learned not to question Colin's financial decisions, no matter how unusual they seemed. Done. Anything else? Research opportunities in small-town development. Focus on infrastructure, media, and local government contracts. I'm exploring some new markets. After ending the call, Colin opened his laptop and reviewed the intelligence Francis had gathered. Photographs, financial records, communication intercepts, and behavioral analyses painted a complete picture of his targets' lives. Stephanie looked happy in the surveillance photos. Younger somehow, more vibrant than she'd been during their marriage. Trevor brought out a side of her that Colin had never seen, laughing, passionate, alive. It was almost beautiful in a tragic way. Almost. The photographs also revealed something else. Stephanie was pregnant. The timeline suggested conception had occurred 3 months ago, long before Colin's disappearance. She was carrying Trevor's child while still married to Colin, living in the house Colin had paid for, spending money from account Colin had established. The betrayal was complete. Colin's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Welcome home, Colin. We need to talk. HG. Harvey Garrison." Somehow, the old man had learned about Colin's return within hours. That suggested either excellent information networks or sheer dumb luck. Either way, it didn't matter. Colin typed back, "Tomorrow, 2 p.m., your office." The response came immediately. "Looking forward to it, son." Colin smiled coldly. Harvey Garrison had no idea what was coming. By evening, Colin's surveillance network was feeding him real-time intelligence on every major figure in Millbrook. He watched Harvey's dinner at the country club, observed Stephanie's evening routine at the house, and tracked Trevor's movements between construction sites and his girlfriend's apartment. They all looked so content, so secure in their small-town lives. They had no idea that their world was about to end. As Colin prepared for bed, he reviewed one final document, a psychological profile he'd commissioned on Trevor Camacho. The man was ambitious but not particularly intelligent, driven by ego and sexual conquest more than genuine malice. He was a tool, not a true architect of betrayal. Stephanie, however, was different. The analysis revealed a woman who'd grown dissatisfied with her marriage long before Trevor arrived. She'd married Colin for stability, but resented his ambition, his time away from home, his focus on building something bigger than their small-town life. Trevor represented escape from responsibility, a return to the pampered princess lifestyle her father had provided. She'd made her choice. Now Colin would make his. Tomorrow, the game would begin in earnest. Chapter 4. Face to Face. The Garrison Construction building dominated Millbrook's business district like a monument to small-town success. Harvey had built it 20 years ago, all glass and steel rising 8 stories above the surrounding shops and offices. To Colin, walking through the marble lobby felt like entering a mausoleum. Executives and secretaries stared as he passed. Word of his return had spread overnight, carried by whispers and social media posts. The boy who'd left in disgrace had returned as a billionaire, and everyone wanted to see what would happen next. Harvey's corner office occupied the entire top floor, with windows overlooking the town square and the hills beyond. The old man stood behind his massive oak desk, wearing the same confident smile that had infuriated Colin a year ago. But there was something different in his eyes now, caution, maybe even fear. "Colin," Harvey extended his hand as if they were old friends. "You look good, son. Success agrees with you." Colin ignored the offered handshake, instead settling into the leather chair across from Harvey's desk. "I'm not your son. I haven't been for over a year." Harvey's smile faltered slightly, but he recovered quickly. "Fair enough. I suppose you've come back to gloat? Show the small-town folks how wrong they were about your little computer company." Night Shield Technologies, Colin corrected. Current valuation, $3.2 billion. Annual revenue, $890 million. Clients include the Department of Defense, NATO, and 47 Fortune 500 companies. The numbers hit Harvey like physical blows. His face went pale, then flushed red. "Jesus Christ, Colin. I had no idea." "Of course you didn't." Colin's voice was ice. "You were too busy mocking what you didn't understand." Harvey moved around the desk, his demeanor shifting from confident patriarch to desperate salesman. "Listen, I owe you an apology. We all do. The way we treated you, the things we said, it was wrong. But family is family, right? Stephanie's been beside herself since you left. She loves you, Colin. She wants you to come home." Colin studied Harvey's face, noting the micro-expressions that betrayed his desperation. The old man was scared, not just of Colin's success, but of something else. Something he wasn't saying. Where is Stephanie, Harvey? At home, waiting for you. She's been hoping. No, Colin interrupted. Where is she right now, at this moment? Harvey's eyes flickered toward the window, then back to Colin. The tell was subtle but unmistakable. She's probably at home, or maybe shopping, I don't. She's at 1247 Oak Street, apartment 3B, Colin said quietly. She arrived there 23 minutes ago. Trevor Camacho has been there since 1:30 p.m. The blood drained from Harvey's face completely. His legs seemed to give out, and he grabbed the edge of his desk for support. You know, Colin observed, about the affair. You've known for months. Harvey collapsed into his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 62 years. Colin, please. It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think. Colin leaned forward. My wife is fucking your project manager in an apartment you helped him find. She's carrying his child while still legally married to me. And you, Harvey, you've been covering for them both. The baby, Harvey whispered, is due in 6 months. Conceived while I was working 18-hour days to build something worth believing in. Colin's voice remained steady, but there was murder in his eyes. Did you laugh about it? The three of you? Did you mock the stupid husband who was too focused on his joke, start up to see what was happening in his own home? Harvey shook his head frantically. No, Colin, it wasn't like that. Stephanie was confused, lonely. You were always working, always traveling. So it's my fault? No, that's not what I meant. Colin stood, his movement sudden enough to make Harvey flinch. Here's what's going to happen, Harvey. I'm going to destroy everything you've built. Your company, your reputation, your influence in this town. I'm going to take it all apart piece by piece. You can't. I can. I will. Colin moved to the window, looking down at the town square where Harvey had played kingmaker for 3 decades. And when I'm finished, you'll understand what it feels like to have everything you've worked for dismissed as a joke. Harvey struggled to his feet, desperation making him bold. Stephanie loves you, Colin. Whatever mistakes she's made, whatever happened with Trevor, it can be fixed. Come home. Work it out. Don't throw away 5 years of marriage over. Over what? Colin turned back to face him. Over betrayal? Over humiliation? Over the fact that my wife has been lying to my face for months while carrying another man's child. She's scared, Colin. Scared to tell you about the baby. Scared you'll leave her. I already left her. Colin's smile was arctic. The question now is how much of your world comes down with hers. Harvey tried one last desperate gambit. What do you want? Money? Contracts? I can make this right. You can't give me what I want, Harvey, because what I want is to watch you fall. All of you. Colin walked toward the office door, then paused. Oh, and Harvey, the next time you see your daughter, tell her I said thank you. Her betrayal set me free to become everything I was meant to be. The door closed behind Colin with a soft click, leaving Harvey Garrison alone with the wreckage of his certainties. In the elevator descending to the lobby, Colin felt a strange peace settle over him. The pretense was over. The masks were off. Now the real work could begin. His phone buzzed with a message from Francis. Target acquired. Trevor Camacho leaving apartment building now. Stephanie Morales still inside. Colin typed back. Begin phase 2. And Francis? Make sure Trevor knows he's being watched. It was time to introduce fear into the equation. Chapter 5. The Web. Colin's war room occupied 3 suites on the Grand Millbrook's top floor, connected by corridors he'd had retrofitted with soundproofing and electronic countermeasures. The space buzzed with quiet activity as his team of specialists worked at computer terminals and communication arrays. Francis drew coordinated surveillance from the central suite, multiple monitors displaying feeds from cameras positioned throughout Millbrook. Jerry Mitchell, Colin's corporate intelligence specialist, had arrived from Singapore that morning with a team of analysts. Her blonde hair was pulled back severely, and her sharp features reflected the predatory intelligence that had made her invaluable in hostile takeovers. Target assessment complete, Jerry announced, handing Colin a thick folder. Harvey Garrison's empire is more fragile than it appears. Colin opened the file, scanning financial statements and architectural drawings. Explain. Garrison Construction depends on municipal contracts for 60% of its revenue. Those contracts are awarded by a city council that Harvey essentially owns through campaign contributions and personal relationships. But the relationships are held together by tradition and personal loyalty, not binding legal agreements. Vulnerabilities? Several. First, the company's cash flow is heavily leveraged. Harvey's been borrowing against future contracts to fund current projects. Second, his key personnel are either family members or long-term employees with no formal succession planning. Third, his political network depends on maintaining his reputation as Millbrook's most successful businessman. Colin nodded, studying architectural blueprints for several of Harvey's recent projects. And Trevor Camacho? Ambitious, overextended financially, and remarkably stupid, Jerry replied with professional disdain. He leased a BMW he can't afford, rented the apartment for his affair using company credit, and has been skimming from construction supply budgets to fund his lifestyle. Evidence. Documented. But here's the interesting part. Harvey knows about the skimming. Colin looked up sharply. He's protecting him? More than that. Harvey's been covering the shortfalls personally. We found transfers from his private accounts to company accounts, always timed to coincide with budget audits. Francis spoke from his monitoring station. Why would Harvey protect someone stealing from him? Colin already knew the answer, but wanted to hear Jerry confirm it. Leverage, she said. Harvey can't fire Trevor without explaining the affair to the entire company. Can't report the theft without admitting he's been enabling it. Trevor has become Harvey's liability, which makes him our asset, Colin concluded. He moved to Francis's station, where live feeds showed Trevor's BMW parked outside a construction site. What's our physical surveillance status? Complete coverage on all primary targets, Francis reported. Audio in Trevor's apartment, visual on all common areas. GPS tracking on his vehicle, Stephanie's car, and Harvey's Cadillac. Phone intercepts are active but haven't yielded actionable intelligence yet. And Stephanie? Francis switched camera angles, showing Stephanie at a downtown cafe with two other women. Even from the distant angle, her pregnancy was becoming visible. She's maintaining normal routines, but stress indicators suggest she knows something's wrong. Harvey probably told her about your meeting. Colin studied his wife's image on the screen. She looked tired, worried, frequently checking her phone. Part of him, a small, quickly suppressed part, felt a flicker of the old affection. But that emotion was a weakness he could no longer afford. Phase 2 implementation? Jerry asked. Colin pulled up a chair to the central table where his team had spread out maps, financial documents, and surveillance photos. We're going to give them what they want most, the illusion of control. He pointed to a photograph of Trevor. Our friend here thinks he's been clever, hiding his affair and his theft. He believes Harvey's protection makes him untouchable. We're going to let him keep believing that while we build a trap around him. What kind of trap? Francis asked. Colin smiled coldly. The kind that destroys everything he touches. Trevor's going to help us bring down Harvey's empire, and he'll do it willingly. Over the next hour, Colin outlined his strategy. It was elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its scope. Phase 2 would involve 3 simultaneous operations, each designed to create maximum chaos while appearing to be organic disasters. Operation Mirror would target Harvey's municipal contracts by introducing irregularities in bidding processes, irregularities that would point directly to Trevor's financial misconduct. Colin's media holdings would then investigate these irregularities, creating public pressure for transparency. Operation Lighthouse would manipulate Trevor's personal weaknesses, using fabricated evidence to convince him that rival construction companies were trying to destroy his relationship with Stephanie. Trevor would respond predictably, taking increasingly desperate actions that would damage his reputation and Harvey's company. Operation Cascade would systematically destroy the personal relationships that held Harvey's political network together. Carefully orchestrated scandals, strategic leaks, and manufactured conflicts would turn allies against each other. Timeline? Jerry asked. 6 weeks, Colin replied. By Thanksgiving, Harvey Garrison's empire will be a memory. Francis frowned. That's aggressive. A lot could go wrong. Nothing will go wrong, Colin said with absolute certainty. Because they still think they're dealing with the weak man who left town a year ago. They have no idea who they're really facing. As his team began implementing the plan, Colin retired to his private suite. Through the windows, he could see Millbrook's evening lights beginning to twinkle. Somewhere down there, Stephanie was probably having dinner, maybe wondering if her husband would ever forgive her. Trevor was likely planning his next meeting with his pregnant mistress. Harvey was probably drinking whiskey and trying to figure out how to protect his kingdom. They all still believed they could win this game. Colin opened his laptop and began typing orders to his global network. Within hours, investigative journalists would receive anonymous tips about municipal corruption in small-town America. Federal regulators would get concerned calls about construction contract irregularities. Social media influencers would suddenly develop interest in exposing infidelity among small-town power players. The machinery of destruction was beginning to turn, and nothing Harvey Garrison could do would stop it. Chapter 6. The Bait. 3 weeks into Colin's campaign, cracks were beginning to show in Harvey's carefully constructed world. The first breach came through the Millbrook Gazette, which had published a series of articles questioning the transparency of municipal contract awards. The stories were carefully researched and professionally written, raising legitimate concerns about competitive bidding processes. Harvey had stormed into Mayor Jim McCoy's office, demanding explanations. McCoy, a nervous man who'd relied on Harvey's support for 2 election cycles, promised to investigate but privately worried about federal attention to city government practices. Colin watched these developments from his command center, tracking each domino as it began to fall. But the real artistry lay in what his targets couldn't see. The subtle manipulations designed to drive them toward increasingly desperate actions. Trevor Camacho sat in his BMW outside Stephanie's house, engine running, paranoia eating at him like acid. For the past week, he'd been receiving anonymous messages suggesting that rival contractors were investigating his personal life. Photos of him entering and leaving Stephanie's apartment had appeared in his mailbox with no explanation. His credit cards were being declined mysteriously, then working again hours later. Someone was playing games with him, and Trevor's limited intelligence couldn't grasp the scope of what he was facing. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. She's telling her husband everything. Get out while you can. Trevor's hands shook as he read the message. It was the 5th such warning he'd received this week, each one more specific than the last. Someone knew about the affair, knew about the baby, and was trying to scare him. But Trevor Camacho wasn't the type to run from a fight. He drove to Garrison Construction's offices, taking the elevator to Harvey's floor with murder in his eyes. The secretary tried to stop him, but Trevor pushed past her into Harvey's private office. "We need to talk," Trevor announced, slamming the door behind him. Harvey looked up from his computer, noting Trevor's agitation. "What's wrong now?" "Someone's watching us. Following me, sending threatening messages, taking pictures." Trevor pulled out his phone, showing Harvey the anonymous texts. "They know about Stephanie, about the baby. They're trying to destroy everything." Harvey's face went ashen as he read the messages. He recognized the systematic precision of the psychological warfare being waged against them. Only one person had the resources and motivation for this kind of campaign. "It's Colin," Harvey said quietly. "Your son-in-law?" "The computer geek." Trevor laughed harshly. "Come on, Harvey. The guy ran away like a coward when his feelings got hurt. He's probably crying into his keyboard somewhere." Harvey walked to his window, looking down at the town square where he'd been king for 3 decades. "Trevor, Colin Morales is worth over $3 billion. He owns companies on 4 continents. He's not the man who left here a year ago. So what? Money doesn't make him dangerous. Money makes everyone dangerous," Harvey snapped. "And Colin's got more than money. He's got connections, resources, and a very good reason to want us destroyed." Trevor slumped into a chair, finally grasping the magnitude of their situation. "What do we do?" Harvey was quiet for a long moment, considering options. Every scenario he could imagine ended with his empire in ruins and his daughter's life destroyed. But there was one possibility, a desperate gambit that might save them all. "We give him what he wants," Harvey said finally. "What do you mean?" "We end the affair. You transfer to another office, preferably in another state. Stephanie tells Colin the truth, asks for forgiveness. Maybe, if we're lucky, he'll be satisfied with destroying my business and leave the family alone. Trevor shot to his feet. Absolutely not. I'm not running away from some jealous husband. And I'm sure as hell not abandoning Stephanie and my kid. Your kid. Harvey's voice was dangerous. That child is going to destroy my daughter's life if this situation isn't handled carefully. It's my child, and Stephanie's my woman now. Colin can go to hell. Harvey stared at Trevor with undisguised contempt. You arrogant fool. You have no idea what you're dealing with. I know exactly what I'm dealing with, Trevor shot back. A rich boy having a temper tantrum. Well, guess what? I'm not intimidated. As Trevor stormed out of the office, Harvey felt the last pieces of his world beginning to crumble. The young man's pride and stupidity were going to get them all destroyed, and there was nothing Harvey could do to stop it. Colin watched the entire confrontation through surveillance cameras he had installed in Harvey's office. The audio was crystal clear, capturing every word of their desperate conversation. Trevor's refusal to back down was exactly what Colin had predicted, and precisely what he needed for the next phase of his plan. Target locked, Francis reported from his monitoring station. Trevor's heading home. GPS shows he's taking the long route, probably trying to detect surveillance. Let him see what we want him to see, Colin replied. Make sure he spots the tail car. I want him paranoid, but not smart enough to figure out the real game. Jerry looked up from her workstation. Phase 3 assets are in position. We can trigger the financial cascade anytime you're ready. Colin nodded. Trevor's refusal to abandon the affair had just sealed everyone's fate. The young man's pride would be the weapon that destroyed Harvey's empire, ruined Stephanie's reputation, and eliminated every trace of the life they'd built while mocking Colin's dreams. Begin Phase 3, Colin ordered. And Jerry? Make sure Trevor knows he has a choice. He can save himself, or he can go down with the ship. But he can't save everyone. The trap was set. Now it was time to spring it. Chapter 7. The First Blow. The crisis began at exactly 8:17 a.m. on a Tuesday morning when Millbrook City Treasurer, Maureen Stewart, discovered discrepancies in municipal accounts that should have been impossible. Someone with high-level access had been moving money between construction contract accounts, creating artificial shortfalls that triggered automatic payments to contractors who hadn't earned them. Within 2 hours, state auditors were on their way to Millbrook. By noon, federal investigators had opened a formal inquiry into municipal contract fraud. By evening, every news station in 3 states was reporting on the small-town corruption scandal that threatened to reach the highest levels of local government. Harvey Garrison's phone hadn't stopped ringing since the story broke. Reporters wanted comments about his company's involvement in the questionable contracts. City officials demanded explanations for cost overruns on projects his company had managed. Federal investigators requested his full cooperation with their ongoing investigation. But Harvey knew none of this was random. Colin had orchestrated every detail, from the initial discrepancies to the media coverage. The precision was terrifying. Trevor found Harvey in his office at 9 p.m., pacing behind his desk like a caged animal. The older man's face was haggard, his usual confidence replaced by desperate panic. They're going to arrest me, Harvey said without preamble. Federal charges. Wire fraud, conspiracy, money laundering. 20 years minimum. Trevor felt the blood drain from his face. But you didn't do anything. Of course I didn't. Harvey exploded. But someone made it look like I did. Someone with the resources and expertise to manipulate financial records, create false evidence, and coordinate a federal investigation. Colin, Trevor whispered. Colin, Harvey confirmed. And he's just getting started. Harvey pulled out a folder thick with legal documents. My lawyers found the evidence trail. It's sophisticated, nearly impossible to detect, but it all points back to my company. Specifically, to irregularities in project accounts that you've been managing. Trevor's stomach dropped. What kind of irregularities? Missing receipts, inflated supply costs, payments to vendors that don't exist. Harvey's eyes were murderous. The same accounts you've been skimming from for months. I only took what I needed. You took what you wanted, Harvey corrected. And now Colin's using those thefts to frame both of us for federal crimes. Trevor slumped into a chair, finally understanding the trap that had been built around him. Every dollar he'd stolen, every false receipt he'd filed, Every vendor payment he'd inflated. All of it had been documented, traced, and weaponized against them. What do we do? Trevor asked weakly. Harvey walked to his window, looking down at the town he'd controlled for 30 years. Protesters had gathered in the square, holding signs demanding transparency and accountability. His kingdom was crumbling in real time. There's only one option, Harvey said finally. We give the investigators a confession. You admit to embezzling funds, falsifying records, and manipulating contract accounts. In exchange, they'll probably offer you a plea deal. 5 to 7 years instead of 20. You want me to confess to crimes I didn't commit? You want to spend 20 years in federal prison for crimes you did commit? Harvey shot back. Because that's the alternative. Collins made sure of it. Trevor's phone buzzed with a text message. He looked at the screen and felt his world collapse completely. The message was from a local news producer. Channel 7 has obtained security footage of you entering 1247 Oak Street repeatedly over the past 6 months. We're running the story tomorrow night, unless you'd like to provide a statement about your relationship with Stephanie Morales. Harvey saw Trevor's expression change. What now? Trevor showed him the message. Harvey closed his eyes, feeling the last pieces of his carefully constructed life falling apart. He's going to destroy everything, Harvey whispered. My business, my reputation, my daughter's marriage. He's going to burn it all down. There has to be something we can do. Against a man worth billions? Harvey laughed bitterly. A man with connections in government, media, and law enforcement? A man who's had a year to plan this revenge. Harvey's intercom buzzed. His secretary's voice was strained. Mr. Garrison, your daughter is here. She says it's urgent. Stephanie burst into the office moments later, her face streaked with tears and her hands shaking. At 6 months pregnant, her condition was obvious, but pregnancy had made her more beautiful rather than less. It only made what was about to happen more tragic. Dad, what's happening? She pleaded. The news is saying terrible things about the company. Colin won't answer my calls. Reporters are camping outside my house. Harvey moved to embrace his daughter, but she stepped back, her eyes darting between him and Trevor. Is it true? She asked quietly. Did you steal money from the company? Trevor opened his mouth to deny it, but Harvey's voice cut him off. Yes, Harvey said simply. It's true. Stephanie's face crumpled. Oh God, what have we done? We fell in love, Trevor said desperately. That's all we did, Stephanie. We fell in love. While you were stealing from my father. While I was lying to my husband. Stephanie's voice rose hysterically. And now Colin knows everything. He's destroying us because of what we did. Harvey's phone rang. He looked at the caller ID and felt his heart stop. Colin, he answered. Harvey. Colin's voice was calm, almost pleasant. I trust you've seen the evening news. What do you want? I want you to understand that this is just the beginning. Tomorrow, the story about Trevor and Stephanie goes public. By the weekend, federal investigators will find evidence of your company's tax evasion. Next week, the EPA will discover environmental violations at your construction sites. Harvey gripped the phone tighter. Stop this, Colin. Please. Stephanie's pregnant. Think about the baby. The baby that isn't mine? Colin's voice turned arctic. The baby she conceived while lying to my face every day? Why would I care about that baby, Harvey? Because you're not a monster. There was a long pause. When Colin spoke again, his voice carried a finality that chilled Harvey to the bone. You made me a monster, Harvey. You and your daughter and her lover. You dismissed my dreams, mocked my ambitions, and betrayed my trust. Now you get to live with what you created. The line went dead. Harvey looked at his daughter and Trevor, seeing them clearly for the first time. Stephanie, beautiful and spoiled and too weak to resist temptation. Trevor, handsome and ambitious and too stupid to understand consequences. They had destroyed everything good in Colin's life, and now Colin was returning the favor with interest. Pack a bag, Harvey told them both. Leave town tonight. Don't tell anyone where you're going. Dad, go, Harvey roared. Before he decides that destroying your lives isn't enough. Before he decides to destroy you. As Stephanie and Trevor fled into the night, Harvey Garrison sat alone in his office, watching his empire burn. Chapter 8. The Perfect Storm. By Thursday morning, Millbrook had become a media circus. News vans lined the streets around Garrison Construction's headquarters while reporters interviewed anyone willing to discuss Harvey Garrison's fall from grace. The story had everything audiences loved: corruption, betrayal, and the spectacular destruction of a small-town dynasty. Colin watched the coverage from his hotel suite, monitoring multiple news feeds while his team coordinated the final phase of their campaign. Federal investigators were now focusing on both Harvey's business practices and Trevor's embezzlement. The EPA had indeed discovered environmental violations at 3 construction sites. The IRS was reviewing 5 years of company tax returns. But the most devastating blow was yet to come. Francis approached Colin's desk with a tablet displaying social media feeds. The affair story is trending nationally. Hashtag Millbrook Scandal is the number 3 hashtag on Twitter. The footage was damning. Security cameras showing Trevor entering and leaving the Oak Street apartment, time-stamped during hours when he should have been at work. Photos of him and Stephanie in intimate moments, taken through telephoto lenses. Financial records showing Trevor using company funds to pay for the apartment lease. But Colin's masterpiece was the interview footage his media team had obtained with seemingly random citizens of Millbrook. One by one, local residents expressed their shock and disappointment at the betrayal of Colin Morales, the hometown tech genius who'd been driven away by his wife's infidelity and her family's cruelty. The narrative was perfect: a brilliant entrepreneur destroyed by small-town pettiness, only to return and expose the corruption that had festered in his absence. Colin wasn't the villain in this story. He was the avenging hero cleaning up his hometown. Jerry entered the suite carrying a briefcase full of legal documents. "The final packages are ready for delivery," she announced. Harvey's bankruptcy papers, Trevor's arrest warrant, and the civil suit against Stephanie. Colin reviewed each document carefully. Harvey's company would be liquidated to pay federal fines and victim restitution. Trevor would be arrested for embezzlement and fraud, facing 15 years in federal prison. Stephanie would lose the house, the cars, and every asset tied to Colin's name. Delivery timeline? Colin asked. Simultaneous service at 2 p.m. Harvey at his office, Trevor at his apartment, Stephanie at the lawyer's office where she'll be signing divorce papers. And the coup de grace? Jerry smiled coldly. At 3 p.m., Channel 7 will broadcast exclusive footage from Harvey's office security cameras. 3 weeks of conversations between Harvey and Trevor, including Trevor's admission of theft and Harvey's decision to cover it up. Colin nodded approvingly. The final recording would destroy any possibility of public sympathy for his enemies. When people heard Trevor boasting about stealing from Harvey while sleeping with his daughter, and Harvey agreeing to protect him, there would be no redemption possible. But Colin's revenge extended beyond mere destruction. He'd been buying property in Millbrook for weeks, using shell companies to acquire foreclosed businesses and distressed real estate. When the dust settled, Colin would own 40% of the town's commercial district. The new Millbrook would be built in Colin's image, with his companies providing jobs and his vision shaping the future. It would be a constant reminder to everyone who dismissed him as a dreamer. At exactly 2 p.m., 3 federal marshals walked into Harvey's office carrying arrest warrants and seizure orders. Harvey didn't resist. He'd been expecting this moment since Colin's call 2 days earlier. Trevor wasn't so cooperative. When officers arrived at his apartment, they found him trying to burn financial documents in his bathtub. The evidence of his panic only strengthened the prosecution's case. Stephanie was served with divorce papers while meeting with her lawyer to discuss potential plea bargains. The document was comprehensive. Colin was claiming adultery, demanding return of all marital assets, and seeking damages for emotional distress. Her lawyer read through the filing with growing dismay. "Mrs. Morales," the lawyer said carefully, "your husband is asking for everything. The house, the cars, the bank accounts, even your jewelry. And he's claiming you committed fraud by concealing the pregnancy." Stephanie's hands shook as she held the papers. "Can he do that? With the evidence he has?" "Yes. Adultery is grounds for fault-based divorce in this state, and the financial fraud allegations are well documented." "What about the baby?" The lawyer's expression was grim. "He's not seeking custody or support obligations. He's disclaiming any parental rights or responsibilities. Stephanie broke down completely, sobbing into her hands as the reality of her situation became clear. She would be divorced, pregnant, and penniless within months. Trevor would be in federal prison. Her father would be bankrupt and disgraced. Colin had taken everything. That evening, as Channel 7 broadcast the security footage from Harvey's office, Colin stood at his hotel window, watching Millbrook's lights twinkle below. The recordings played across every news station, showing Harvey and Trevor conspiring to cover up theft while discussing their contempt for the computer nerd who trusted them. The public reaction was swift and brutal. Within hours, death threats were being posted on social media against both men. Protesters gathered outside the jail, where Harvey was being held pending trial. Someone threw rocks through the windows of Trevor's apartment. Colin's phone rang. The caller ID showed his lawyer in Singapore. "Colin, the U.S. media attention is incredible," the lawyer reported. Night Shield stock is up 18% since the story broke. Investors love the narrative of the brilliant entrepreneur overcoming betrayal. "Excellent," Colin replied. "What about the Millbrook acquisitions?" "Complete. You now own controlling interests in 67% of the town's commercial properties. The mayor's office has reached out about potential development partnerships." Colin smiled. Mayor McCoy was already positioning himself as Colin's ally, abandoning his longtime relationship with Harvey as quickly as possible. Politics was about survival, and McCoy understood which way the wind was blowing. "Schedule a town hall meeting for next week," Colin instructed. "I want to discuss Millbrook's future with its citizens." As he ended the call, Colin felt a deep satisfaction settle over him. The boy who had been mocked for his dreams had become the man who controlled his hometown's destiny. Harvey's kingdom had fallen, and Colin's empire was rising from its ashes. But he wasn't finished yet. There was still one final message to deliver. Chapter 9. The New King. The Millbrook Community Center had never hosted an event quite like Colin's town hall meeting. Every seat was filled, with hundreds more standing along the walls and crowding outside to listen through portable speakers. Local television crews broadcast the event live, while national media outlets provided coverage of the billionaire's return story that had captivated the country. Colin took the stage wearing a perfectly tailored Navy suit, looking every inch the tech mogul he'd become. The boy who'd left town in disgrace was now a commanding presence, radiating confidence and power that silenced the crowd before he even spoke. "Good evening, Millbrook," Colin began, his voice carrying clearly through the auditorium. "I know many of you remember me as the dreamer who used to work out of Bobby Shannon's garage. The guy with the joke, startup who thought he could compete with real businesses." Nervous laughter rippled through the audience. Most of these people had heard Harvey Garrison mock Colin's ambitions at one time or another. "A year ago, I left this town because I was tired of being told my dreams were worthless. I was tired of being treated like a failure by people who never bothered to understand what I was trying to build." Colin's eyes swept the crowd, making contact with faces he recognized. "Today, I'm here to announce Millbrook's future." Behind Colin, a massive screen lit up with architectural renderings and development plans. The images showed a transformed downtown district with gleaming office buildings, a state-of-the-art technology center, and modern shopping complexes. Night Shield Technologies is investing $800 million in Millbrook's redevelopment, Colin announced. "We're building a tech campus that will employ over 3,000 people. We're creating a startup incubator that will attract entrepreneurs from across the region. We're turning this town into a model for what small-town America can become in the digital age." The crowd erupted in cheers. $800 million would transform Millbrook from a sleepy agricultural town into a thriving tech hub. The economic impact would be staggering. "But let me be clear about something," Colin continued, his voice cutting through the applause. "This investment comes with conditions. Millbrook's leadership must meet the highest standards of transparency and accountability. There will be no tolerance for corruption, nepotism, or the kind of cronyism that allowed Harvey Garrison to treat this town like his personal kingdom." The mention of Harvey's name sent a chill through the crowd. The man who dominated Millbrook for 30 years was now in federal custody, his empire reduced to rubble by the dreamer he'd mocked. Mayor McCoy stood up from the front row, his face flushed with nervous excitement. "Mr. Morales, on behalf of the City Council, I want to express our gratitude for this incredible opportunity. We're committed to working with you to ensure—" "Sit down, Jim," Colin interrupted coldly. "You're not going to be part of Millbrook's future." McCoy's face went white. "I don't understand." "You understand perfectly. For 8 years, you've been Harvey Garrison's puppet. Every contract, every zoning decision, every policy vote, you did what Harvey told you to do. That kind of corruption ends now." Colin nodded toward the back of the auditorium, where Francis Drew stood with several other men in dark suits. Federal investigators have been reviewing Millbrook's municipal records. They found numerous violations of competitive bidding laws, conflicts of interest, and ethical breaches. Mayor McCoy, along with 3 city council members, will be facing federal charges. The auditorium erupted in chaos as reporters surged forward and audience members began shouting questions. McCoy tried to flee but found his path blocked by federal marshals who'd been waiting outside. Colin watched the scene with cold satisfaction. He'd promised to clean house, and he was delivering on that promise in the most public way possible. "Order!" Colin's voice boomed through the sound system, cutting through the noise. "This is why I left Millbrook a year ago. This is the corruption and cronyism that drove away anyone with vision or integrity. But that era is over." He gestured to the development plans still displayed behind him. "The new Millbrook will be built on merit, innovation, and accountability. Companies that want to do business here will compete fairly for contracts. Politicians who want to serve here will be held to the highest ethical standards. Citizens who live here will have opportunities their children can be proud of." From the crowd, an elderly woman stood up. Colin recognized her as Elvira Steele, who'd run the local bakery for 40 years. "What about people like us, Mr. Morales? People who've lived here all our lives, but don't know anything about computers or technology?" Colin's expression softened slightly. "Mrs. Steele, the tech campus will need janitors, cafeteria workers, security guards, and maintenance staff. The shopping complex will need retail workers, restaurant employees, and service providers. The construction projects will need local contractors and tradespeople. I'm not trying to replace Millbrook's people. I'm trying to give them better opportunities." Another voice called out, "What about Harvey Garrison's employees? People who worked for him for years." "Anyone who worked for Garrison Construction and can pass a background check will be offered positions with the new development companies," Colin replied. "But understand this, the days of getting jobs through family connections or personal favors are over. In the new Millbrook, you'll succeed based on what you can do, not who you know." The crowd was beginning to understand the magnitude of what Colin was offering. This wasn't just economic development. It was a complete transformation of how their town operated. Lawrence Sparks, a local contractor who'd competed unsuccessfully against Harvey for decades, stood up. "Mr. Morales, a lot of us are grateful for what you're doing. But we have to ask, is this about helping Millbrook, or is it about getting revenge on the people who wronged you?" Colin stared at Sparks for a long moment, letting the question hang in the air. When he finally spoke, his voice was quietly honest. "Both," he said. "I'm not going to pretend this is pure altruism. Harvey Garrison, his daughter, and Trevor Camacho destroyed my marriage and tried to destroy my dreams. They're paying the price for that betrayal. But their punishment is Millbrook's opportunity." He gestured toward the architectural renderings again. "I could have built this tech campus anywhere. I chose Millbrook because this is my home, and because the people here deserve better than what they've been getting. The fact that my success makes Harvey's failure more complete is just satisfying symmetry." As the town hall meeting concluded, Colin stood at the podium watching his former neighbors file out of the auditorium. Some looked excited about the opportunities ahead. Others seemed worried about the changes coming to their quiet town. A few appeared fearful of the man who'd returned to reshape their world. All of them understood that Colin Morales was now the most powerful person in Millbrook. Francis approached the stage as the crowd dispersed. "The press wants interviews. Washington wants meetings. And Stephanie Morales is outside asking to speak with you." Colin felt a flicker of emotion at the mention of his wife's name. He'd seen her in the crowd, during his presentation, sitting alone in the back row with tears streaming down her face. Even 7 months pregnant and facing financial ruin, she was still beautiful. Still the woman he'd once loved more than his own dreams. "Tell the press I'll make a statement tomorrow," Colin instructed. "Tell Washington I'll call them next week. And tell Stephanie." He paused, considering his words carefully. "Tell Stephanie that we have nothing left to say to each other." As Colin left the community center, he passed Stephanie waiting by the door. She looked up at him with desperate hope in her eyes, one hand resting on her swollen belly. "Colin, please," she whispered. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but the baby isn't mine," Colin finished coldly. "You made your choice, Stephanie. Now live with it." He walked past her without another glance, leaving her sobbing in the doorway of the building where he'd just announced Millbrook's transformation. Outside, Colin's Mercedes waited with Francis behind the wheel. As they drove through downtown Millbrook, Colin surveyed the buildings and businesses that would soon bear his mark. This was his kingdom now, built on the ruins of Harvey Garrison's empire. The boy who'd been mocked for dreaming too big had become a man who owned everything his tormentors had once controlled. It was, Colin reflected, the perfect revenge. But it was also just the beginning. Millbrook was only the first piece of a much larger empire Colin intended to build. An empire where loyalty was rewarded, betrayal was punished, and no one would ever again mistake his ambition for weakness. The kid from the garage had become the king of the castle. And kings, Colin had learned, never forgave those who tried to destroy them. As the Mercedes disappeared into the night, Stephanie Morales stood alone outside the community center, her hand on her pregnant belly, watching the taillights fade into darkness. The man she betrayed had just sentenced her to a life of poverty and disgrace, while transforming himself into the most powerful person she'd ever known. She finally understood what Harvey had tried to tell her. Colin Morales was not a man to be underestimated, and he was definitely not a man to be crossed.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.